it's this dynamic process. It requires skill sets. And it requires it not only just ethically, but also because you want it to look good. You want it to be productive. You want it to meet those goals that you have to impact people, to be an education tool, to inform people about their place in the world. So all of those things are really important. So that could be a barrier when people think it's just easy, or, you know, we just need the money and then we can put this in and walk away, that it really is sort of an ongoing living component of an extension, hopefully, of your institution. Also understanding that these food producing spaces are not static. So again, like, it's just not a static space. It's not going to always look the way it did, you know, day after day. So I think in explaining what's happening in a garden or in a farm, it's going to look different seasonally. Things are going to get torn out. Other things are going to be planted. So there's an ever-evolving sort of education component if you're using it in that way. And that can be a barrier, because if you have limited staff or limited, you know, curatorial, you know, research, and you're making placards or however you're, you know, kind of using it as an education tool, that may be a challenge. And then I think most importantly, and something I want to get more into, is just understanding class and cultural differences and this whole idea of preaching to the choir. So everybody knows you're supposed to eat healthy food. Everyone knows that if you don't eat healthy food, you become ill. And you know, when some of the other speakers talked about this today as well, there are major class and cultural barriers around this that are pretty serious and are you know, really rooted in racism and oppression that's historic. So sort of having the cool garden and talking about the food system and how important it is to have food and fitness, you have to also address, I think, the barriers and the reasons that we're at this point in history. I think it's really, really essential. So for us, the way that we do it, we're actually, like, you know, doing these projects in these pretty, you know, Grant Park with kids from the projects who've never been downtown in Chicago, never been downtown. And the interface that they have with the business world, with tourists, the fact that they're positioned to really be the gatekeepers within these special spaces, breaks down a lot of those barriers that typically you wouldn't really address in a regular exhibit, let's say, kind of framing it to the work that you guys do. I'm going to go a little bit more into to the Grant Park protege, because I think it's really the most relevant to a museum and how it's structured and how sort of the benchmarks within that project. But again, kind of looking at just curating spaces. The Chicago Avenue Community Farm, which is a farm that was built on asphalt. This is a partnership with Fourth Presbyterian Church. Most of the youth who work in this garden, who are now employed in this garden, come from the Cabrini Green housing projects. And, you know, this idea of creating a space, and it was very much, you know, for me, as somebody who's trained as an artist and has an art therapy background as well, I really created that space with all these things in mind, thinking about this cross-cultural interaction that was going to be happening from pretty, like, elite, economically prosperous church audience, if you will, and, you know, an audience of youth and families from one of the most infamous housing projects in the United States. And what was that going to look like for these folks to really intentionally be community gardening together? What was our role going to be as a technical advisor, and, you know, just the technical stuff about growing food on asphalt, but also serving as a bridge, a cultural bridge between these two communities. So that was really, really, really important. And it took a long time, because we had people who came in from the church side, like, this is my real estate, and I'm here to grow my stuff, and I'm going to extract and take this stuff home, and had no interest in interacting with anybody. And we had folks from the community who would come in, drop their kids off, and be like, well, this isn't for me. This is for those folks from over there. This is not really for us. This is too beautiful for this to be for us. And that literally was coming out of people's mouths. That's terrifying. So you're beginning to see in this organic space that there's this barrier around beauty, around fertility, around a space where people can just come together to grow food. So imagine in a museum. Imagine someone coming from a community where it's not clean, there's not green space, there's not beautiful things. And how are you connecting with those folks? So those are things that, as you know, someone, when I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, so and that experience framed me working and learning within a museum school what the barriers were. That drove me as an artist to think about how I could be a conduit between the community and these institutions that really aren't for one another. They're not designed for one another. How come? But they should be. They're for everybody, right? So that was the big problem that I started off with. Turned into a much bigger problem. It wasn't just about getting kids and families to make art and come into the Art Institute. It became around these really huge social disparities and issues of apartheid and segregation and economics and color lines and economic lines and all kinds of stuff that is part of the fabric of this country. So that's, the bigger picture. But these are real issues that you can address when you're growing food in a garden, because everyone eats. And maybe the person who you don't think has any value, who doesn't know anything because they don't speak proper English or they don't have credentials, may know more than you. How about that? How does that dynamic change? What does that mean when you're getting trained by somebody who you typically are serving or trying to educate or bring information to? It's about food, though, too. So you can sit around and have a meal and talk about where your connections are. And folks who are from the South, I think, probably can have some resonance around that, because I think that typically happened even in the most dark times, is that there were those connections. So very powerful. So back to Grant Park. So this is this, elite space that really has created. Okay, I mean, see what I'm saying? It's outrageous. It's the front yard of Chicago. It's part of the Burnham plan, and this is North President's Court. So this is right across from the Buckingham Fountain. The Art Institute is right behind Lincoln, so that's Lincoln between those two pylons, or obelisks, or whatever they are. And you can sort of see the master plan of the space. So the problem that I had to solve with the space was how to create a productive farm, how to make it beautiful all the time. It has to be beautiful all the time. It's a landscape. How to create a space where kids can come in and learn how to farm, how to impact policy so there could be something like this, not just downtown, but in every community. And, in these communities that we're now calling food deserts, but in communities that I've been working in for prior to this, reacceptance of farming in my life, the new art, the edible art. How can all these things happen in a landscape where, people of color usually don't do this kind of stuff at this level? So that was what I was facing. So lo and behold, this opportunity opened up. It's across the street from the Art Institute. So I left the farm to go to art school. I had no interest in farming. No interest. No interest whatsoever. Wanted to be an artist. Back farming. So there's a certain spirituality to this work that is really pretty impressive, and also really inspiring, but also has a lot of responsibility that goes with it, because all these kids, their lives change as soon as they have these experiences. So public spaces. So in that frame, in that beautiful downtown Chicago space, we're also meeting food security needs. These spaces trigger inquiry, they impact policy, and they reshape the urban landscape. So literally taking a space that I'm gonna be real reductive, some marigolds and petunias. I think there's much nicer things that were put there, but annuals, things that are put in, they look beautiful. You walk by, you're like, oh wow, Chicago's gorgeous, and move on. Now people are looking at this space and what is that food? And literally 150 varieties of heirloom, vegetables, edible flowers, herbs from all over the world. And people connecting to a space, stopping in their tracks, taking pictures in front of this vegetable farm, that's super productive. So that has, and that's been going on for 7-8 years. I think it's really changed policy. It's changed how people think about what to do with public land and how to use landscape budgets. It should not, when you're living in a city where there's people who are literally nutritionally starving, we should be growing food wherever we can. It can be beautiful, but we should be growing food. I think that's just a social, institutional responsibility. Just a little bit. So part of that for our youth, so part of the flip side of this is that we have high, high expectations for our youth. They come into this space, they have to learn how to work together. They have to learn how to resolve conflict nonviolently. They have to be contributing members of society. But the flip of that, again, is that I can't expect them to stop slinging drugs if I don't have a job for them. And that's the reality. I can't take a kid who is raising himself or herself and all the siblings and cousins because, you know, the dad is not around or institutionalized and the mom is under a lot of pressure. So how do you do that? So part of our big drive is making sure that we're economically sustainable because we want to hire each and every one of these kids who wants to go to that next level. But we have to prepare them, whether it's with us or other partners who are looking to expand farm projects. So these kids are our future staff. They're members of our staff now. They started in high school. They're earning great salaries. And that's a little bit of a different model as well, because it's not just about growing beautiful food to sell to all the upscale restaurants, which we do. It's not just about, giving food away at a food pantry, which we do. It's most importantly about being able to provide a space and opportunity for these kids to be your future museum goers, to be kids who think about the world and feel that they're part of it, and that their families are part of it. It's really, really important. So this is all happening in these beautiful spaces. It has to be pretty. So, and I think this may have, I gave a talk last night, so all the pieces are kind of sliding together. But someone was talking about just the historic challenges for people of color around agriculture. And that's very real. And it's important. I mean, just within my short life, I did not enjoy growing up on a family farm. Didn't enjoy it. It was hard, horrible work, It formed my ethics and my physical strength and prowess, but it was hard. I wanted to make art. I wanted to make things. And what brought me back and sort of seduced me into coming back to this work was because I could do it in this context, that it's beautiful, that it's within this cultural dynamic space, that it's in the city, that's not isolated, that it has all these other benefits, and that I could see that I was making a difference in people's lives. So some artists love to just go away into a cave somewhere and make their art. It's hard for me to do that when I know people are suffering. That's just the kind of artist I am. So I feel most inspired and engaged when I'm seeing the work that I'm doing impacting the environment. And to be able to activate kids and their families into thinking about how they can be active social change agents within these spaces and meet a real problem. This is not just, an idea kind of thing. This is about growing something in a beautiful, responsible way that also fills someone's belly with something that they need. So that, I think, is a really dynamic component of this food as connector. It's not just an idea, it's real. It's a human right. And I think it's just really, really important to think about that in the context of an institution. So connecting these spaces, they're beautiful. They have all kinds of, growing heirloom seeds and plants and all kinds of historical things we can talk about. But most importantly, it's connecting folks who are disconnected with spaces that are traditionally off limits. And that has been really, really, really scary to see how deep that is. I walk through, I'm a person of color, but I'll go anywhere. I don't feel like my folks did what they needed to do, and so I don't have those fears. But I've taken some of those on because I can feel and empathize with some of my kids, how scared they are to even come into different neighborhoods. Both because of just the privilege issue and being profiled, but also because it's dangerous. There's gang issues, all kinds of internalized oppression stuff that's going on. But those are things to be really aware of. And these projects that we're all working on, and the panel will talk about the projects as well, that we really begin to take some of those barriers down. But this off limits thing is very real. I love this picture. Those are birdhouse boards. We love this picture because he's harvesting and also showing off his style in the garden. So just some other kinds of pieces that just to shift. That was my social justice part of the talk. into some of just the urban ag and green jobs training component. So these are the kind of the elements that we're pulling together when we talk about urban ag and food systems work. So it's very much about reconnecting all these pieces within the food system. It's also an ecological model. I mean, I'm sure there's all kinds of other things that you could put into that would look similar. So we really see this closing the loop as being very important in ending this technological divide that is already started around green jobs and food production. We want to make sure that the folks who get the information and have access to resources are the folks who are most impacted by food access issues, food deserts, health disparities, historically have been misused by the food system for cheap labor, for how we've extracted resources from other countries, oil and otherwise, to supplement and subsidize our food system. That has to stop. And I think museums can really be powerful in telling that story. You guys have the data. You have the information. People don't understand. They just think it just magically shows up in the store. They have no idea how it's subsidized, why we go to war, why we need oil, and it's connected to our food system. People need to understand that in the most direct, plain terms. So that's your job. Please do that. My job and my many colleagues and partners is to figure this part out, is how to do this piece in the most efficient way possible with the most limited resources. So we're not trying to recreate another thing that people who don't have access can't participate in. How can we do this year-round food production? This is year-round. This is wintertime, growing all this stuff in a greenhouse that costs $3,000 to put up. That how people communities can really own this and do this for their own food sovereignty and food security, but also to take this product and sell it. To be able to sell it to upscale restaurants who need this product to do their business, but also to feed people in their own community. That's totally good. Those things are not, they do not clash. We need everybody at the table. So the aquaponics food and fish production, we're about to start this in Chicago. This makes me very nervous because it's fish, so we're moving up on the food chain. I've watched many a worm die because of people's learning curves. Fish scare me. Just makes me nervous, but it's really important. It's protein, and it's a much higher level of understanding about how water works and river ecology and fertility, and it's just basically a river system. This is all this is, artificially captured, but at a really low cost. So anybody could set this up in their basement or in a greenhouse or in a school classroom. So yellow perch and tilapia. Yellow perch are in the Great Lakes. It's the traditional Friday fish fry fish. We're moving into yellow perch more because of some financial, they're indigenous, number one, and number two, $5 a pound for tilapia, $28 a pound for yellow perch. So the economics, the metrics there are much friendlier for some of the work that we're doing. This is my lifetime thing. So in case people don't know, Will Allen is my father. So if you know who he is, so that's my dad. So my thing is this digester. I want to see digesters instead of piles of compost. I want to see a digester breaking down food waste, turning it into food for worms, and creating lots of energy so that we're really completely off the grid, that we can power vehicles through food waste, which is totally possible, that we have all the fertility that we need so everybody can grow as many farms as they want, and that we also can extract water from our waste as well, so we don't have to keep, what's the opposite of replenish? Deplete, thank you. Depleting our water. Composting and vermiculture bins. So this slide really shows the next level. And this is where you start. So just in vessel, simple pallets. These are pallets that have hardware cloth. You pile them with carbon and nitrogen inside and cap them off and leave them. And then in a 6 months to a year, depending on how well you pack them, you have compost. That's all.